So Suelen is an artist, researcher, and educator working at the crossroads of African diasporic memory, ancestral politics, and counter-colonial thoughts across her academic, artistic, and spiritual path. Born in Conjunction, Brazil, and based in Berlin, she's currently a PhD candidate in art history, investigating the presence and absence of African-Brazilian heritage in German collections. Her work brings together art education and institutional critique to examine silence, invisibility, and the colonial structures that shape what can be known and recognized. So thank you for being here. Let's welcome you, and yeah.
Crossing, we are thinking about the same theme of things, but from different perspectives, and they blend so amazingly, and I'm super excited to know you more. Unfortunately, I could not be present in the other activities to know the type of discussions. I hope it's not too redundant to what you are already discussing these days. And my intention is just to bring some food for thought to maybe inspire the work of the artist, but also broader discussions that we might have from now until the end of the project, since it's a large process, right? So I will begin introducing myself from a place. As Jacob said, my name is Suelen Calonga. I am an African descendant, born and raised in Brazil. I am an artist, art historian, researcher. I'm also a mother, which is a big part of my roles are around the motherhood. I'm also a practitioner of an African spiritual tradition, the way it rooted in the diaspora. And my work in all of these paths happens between archives, museums, the ethnographic collections, in my artistic practice, in my spirituality, in this work with the memory of the African diasporic memories. So in my PhD, I researched the Afro-Brazilian heritage that has been displaced into German institutions. So ritual objects, sound recordings, photographs, documents, these traces. And one of the first difficulties of my work, it's very simple to explain, but it has been very difficult to solve, actually, because in many times, I don't know where to look for my stuff, my things, our heritage. There is an immense difficulty of knowing what exists of this heritage here in Germany, not only because the unwillingness of the institutions to open the inventories and make public what they have, but mainly because even if they open 100% the inventories tomorrow, this heritage would still be displaced between the museum's categories. And I will talk a little bit about categorization. Museums, they organize the world, right, through geographical categories, mainly. And this seems neutral because we are used to it, but this is not. So, just to crop the geography here to the focus of the conversation, we have on one side Africa, as if it were like a continent archive for Europe. It's entirely mapped, extracted in several levels. And on the other side of the Atlantic, we have the Americas. And it's important to highlight that we have more than one Americas, despite one of the countries in this geographical space claims America to them, but it's not like that. But regarding the Americas, I will stick to Brazil, which is my origin, but also the focus of my research. Traditionally, for the European knowledge systems, the Americas are devoted to mapping the original peoples, right? The indigenous peoples. So even if the museums open tomorrow 100% of their inventories and somehow facilitated the access to this information, to what they have, it would still be very difficult to find what is African Brazilian, because this category doesn't exist anywhere outside Brazil. In Brazil, we know what is an African Brazilian heritage, but outside of the world, there isn't this category, let's call it like this. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I have spent a lot of time recently thinking about this place of in-between, which is neither one thing nor the other, and this reflects also in my choice of naming it African Brazilian instead of Afro-Brazilian, which is the most common nomenclature that people gives, because I don't want to shorten the African part of this in-between. So it is neither one thing nor the other, but can be one thing and the other at the same time. And this is the very condition of the African diaspora in the Americas. And I will not go into the details of the history, but actually the reason for the existence of this entire continent, right, the Americas and the Caribbean, North America, Central America, Caribbean, South America, this entire continent only exists the way it is today because of colonization, right, and the trafficking of Africans to be enslaved on the other side of the ocean to produce the wealth we are all enjoying here in Europe today. Not equally, of course. So, where does the African Brazilian belong inside an European museum or archive? Is it in the Africa department, Americas department, history of slavery, art history, ethnology? Is it religion, crime, forensics, natural history, folklore? How to search for it? And what I study often exists in between. It's not one thing or the other, maybe both, maybe neither of the things. And this is also, this replicates the condition of the African diasporic people in the world. So, there is this place of the in-between that Iago was saying, and this is also one of the reasons why I'm here today. A few months ago, I gave this workshop that was called Mind the Gap, from critical thinking to epistemic disobedience in dissident artistic practices, where I proposed thinking about the gap not only as an error or an empty space waiting to be filled, but as something to look at, to mind of, to give importance. And then the gap is not, the gap here, what I'm calling gap, is what it's not mapped by the available categories, but it still communicates with the categories. So the gap, this is one of the slides of of that workshop. The gap is what stays between one explanation and another, between one named thing and another named thing, between what the system is able to say and what continues to exist even without fitting into one sentence. It's like an interval, a threshold, a breathing zone, an instability. And perhaps, I don't know, because I don't have a complete scope of thinking to deliver to you today, so I will talk about many things for us to get somewhere, or maybe stay in between something. Perhaps this is from where I want to speak today, not to present this closed thesis, but as some food for thought, as I said in the beginning. The parasite. The parasite also lives, right, in this in-between. It's not completely outside the system, but also does not belong to the system or obeys to the system, right? It enters, listens, learns, interrupts, feeds from it, disorganizes it from within, forces the system to acknowledge that it is not pure in the sense that contains something from the outside. And I will bring to you today 2 words for us to think about that seems simple, but are also very charged with this ambivalence, this ambiguity. And they are absence and invisibility. I'm sure that you already talked about this from many perspectives these days. And I also want to think about with you maybe about what happens when these words stop meaning only bad things, right? Like signs of weakness, loss, erasure, imposed absence or imposed invisibility, but when they also begin to function as strength, which I think is valuable for us to think when we're thinking about the On Parasiting. As a strategy, as shelter, as refusal, as survival. Here on the stage, in front of you here, there's a glass dome and also a box. I don't know if you can see them. One thing seems to contain nothing, and the other seems to hide something. So maybe we can think about perhaps neither of them is really empty, and perhaps the glass is indicating a question for us. What do we expect to find when we look to something like this? And perhaps the box is indicating to us something like, why do we think everything needs to be revealed? If we see something close, we have this eager to see what's inside. So I wanted to put us to think a bit about that space between the apparent emptiness and the protected secrecy. And I want to begin with the most basic thing, dictionary definitions. So, absence. We have here some definitions. Absence usually appears connected to being outside, not being present, lacking, not existing in a certain place, like not being where you're usually expected to be, the fact that you're not there, that it is not there or does not exist, a condition in which something expected, wanted, or looked for is not present or does not exist, failure to be present, something or somebody is away, and also this very interesting definition, the impairment of consciousness, when you are absent from the mind. And invisibility, it usually appears connected to what cannot be seen, right? Both in the sense of not fitting within our possibility of seeing. It's not possible for us to see, but it also can mean being ignored, not noticed, and not considered. There we have not being able to be seen, not being perceivable by the eye, being ignored or unnoticed, being impossible to see. Here again, ignored, not noticed, not considered, that is invisible. So despite the determination in the definitions from the dictionaries, these 2 words do not represent immutable conditions for themselves. They can only mean something in relation to something else. So a thing is absent from somewhere, someplace. A thing is invisible to someone, to some, right? Absence depends on an expected place. Invisibility depends on a gaze, a regime of vision, or a technology of perception. And neither of these conditions necessarily means non-existence, right? An empty chair, like this one here, the stools here, marks an absence. But the wind, the electricity is invisible, right? A person can be absent from a photograph and still have shaped everything that happened before, after, or around that frame. A star can be invisible to us here on Earth and continue burning there, up there. Or it can be visible for us now, but have already disappeared thousands of years ago. So it's always in relation. Seeing is not a guarantee of presence, and not seeing, it's not a proof of absence. There is also a very simple physical fact that interests me. The human vision is very limited, right? We only see a small range, a small band of the electromagnetic spectrum. I'm not talking anything new, of course. You heard about this many times during your life. Between the infrared and the ultraviolet is what we call visible light. So everything that we can perceive with the eye is within this range. But the world does not end where our vision ends, right? There are radiations, waves, forces, and presences that cross our bodies all the time without becoming image for us. And this interests me because many times we speak of the invisible as if it was an exception, right? What we cannot see is an exception to everything else. But perhaps the visible is the exception. Most of the reality is outside our direct capacity to see or to perceive. I'm thinking here about the dark matter. I will come back to this a little bit later. So when I say being unseen, as is the title of the talk today, I am not speaking only about erasure, not being seen because you were erased from a system. I'm speaking about this ambiguous condition. There are absences that are produced by loss, by violence, by forgetting, but there are also absences produced by agency, removing oneself from a situation, not being where the power expects to find us, leaving before being captured, making oneself absent in order to remain whole. In the same way, there are also imposed invisibilities, right? The invisibility produced by racism, by oppression, by neglect, by indifference, by wrong classifications. But there are also the cultivated, the chosen, the necessary invisibilities. Being invisible in order not to become a target. Being invisible to preserve a knowledge, to protect a practice. Being invisible in order to cross a hostile territory, to survive. Something has accustomed us to think of absence and invisibility as associated with weakness. And this we can relate also with the knowledge systems that are based on the invisible, like the spirituality, our relation with what we cannot see, and how the hegemonic science turned this way of knowledge into something less trustful. What does not appear, right, would be lesser. What's not seen and recognized by some standards would be less important. What is not documented would be less true. But perhaps this says more about the regimes that organize what we can call reality than about what remains outside them, outside these regimes. As I said, the visible world is not the whole world. It's only part of the world that our tools, our habits, our categories, and our desires are able to apprehend. What remains outside, it's not necessarily lacking. Sometimes exceeds, sometimes escapes, protects itself. Sometimes it was pushed outside. Sometimes it never wanted to enter. So to expand the reach of our practices, and I'm thinking artistic practice, academic practices, whatever practices, maybe it's good for us to change our questions, regarding these two words. So it's not only what is absent, but absent from where, absent for whom, produced as absence by which system. And it's also not what is invisible, but invisible to which gaze, invisible through which technology, invisible by violence or invisible by choice. This is a little bit philosophical. And the title of this talk is Being Unseen, right? And I want to inhabit this unstable place between what was torn out of the field of the visible and what chose not to surrender completely to the gaze. As I told in the beginning, in my practice, I often work from traces that allow me to enter these gaps. For example, photographs that were left out of ethnographic travel accounts. There is a whole travel account relating what's happened in one mission, for instance, and some of the photographs were taken but are not there. This interests me. Administrative records in this archive, small notes, incomplete descriptions or blank metadata, inventory numbers, how they are sequenced. And many times what I find is described as lack. Unknown author, unknown origin, unknown use, unknown name. And the institution always says there is not enough information. We'll search for it, as it was always possible to fill the gaps, right? The archives say we don't know yet. But the object is already there, the sound is already there, the gesture is there, the silence is there. The motivation for the absence is also there, but is invisible. I will give you one example of my very recent work. Recently, I found a photograph in an archive. This is the Ethnologist's Museum here in Berlin. Recently, I found this photograph in an archive while I was reviewing all the photographic documentation of an expedition made by a German ethnologist to Brazil. And the title in the catalog, as you can see up there, is Family in Cuiabá, right? Família em Cuiabá. Cuiabá is a city in Brazil between the Pantanal and the Amazon forest. It's very it's not at the coast, it's very in the interior of the country. Nothing here in the available metadata indicated that this image could be important for my research, right? No word related to Black presence. No term that connected that photograph to my searches for the African-Brazilian traces in German archives. But when I opened the image by chance, I saw a Black family. A couple, a smiling woman, 2 kids here. And below the photograph, there was a handwritten inscription. This is just a detail. I will show you right now the full image. The full image is this one. The manuscript title said, Negra Família from Cuiabá, which is Black family in Cuiabá, right, from Cuiabá. And the entire ambiguity was there, because the information existed, but it was not where I could find it. The word was in the body of the image, but it had disappeared from the body of the archive. Probably, this is what I imagine, at some point, the museum decided to clean the description, right? Perhaps to avoid language considered problematic, perhaps to make the catalog more neutral, perhaps to appear politically correct. But in this gesture of cleaning the surface of the archive, it erased exactly the only information that could lead me to that image. It was completely by chance, and this make me think how big can be the scope. I cannot imagine how many other things they have in the same situation. This particle, nega, there is the only information that could lead me to that image if I was searching actively for it. So the attempt to correct the violence of language produced another layer of invisibility. And this makes me think, who decides that a family, not just any family, but this black family, in the interior of the 19th century Brazil, this was 8 years after the emancipation, who decided that this family could be described only as family, as if neutrality was innocent here? Who they want to save by taking out the nigger from the description? So in this case, the invisibility was not produced by the absence of the image. This is what I want to make clear. The image exists. It was not also produced by the total absence of the information. The information is there. The invisibility was produced by the separation between the information and the system that organizes the access. And perhaps this is one of the most sophisticated forms of invisibility as violence. Not destroying, not hiding, not denying what exists, but removing what allows it to be seen. This is what I call gap, right? In my case, in my work with the archives. But the gap is not only something that is missing. Now, let's go back to our topic. The gap can be what exists, right? But does not answer the search. And this can also be a positive force, not only negative. Returning to this slide from the workshop that I mentioned before about the gap, on one side, there is an explanation of one thing. On the other side, another explanation. But in between them, things that the system still cannot read to be able to categorize are there. And it's difficult to see the gap as something positive just because this modern hegemonic science I was talking about has addicted us to think that it is possible to know everything that exists. It's just a matter of time and being able to refine our skills to be able to know everything. As if it was possible to map the whole existence. We are in the process of mapping the whole existence. So we begin to look at every gap, every absence, every invisible piece of information as a failure that needs to be fixed. As if missing always needed to be completed and explanation expanded. This thing needs to be bigger and bigger and need to absorb the gap, make the gap to be smaller. But the gap is not always failure. So sometimes the gap is a wound, a violence, is the exact place where someone hid their responsibility, just like I just showed you with the photo. But sometimes the gap is also technology, a way of preventing everything from being legible and capturable. We can change our relationship to absence and invisibility and ask not only what's missing here, but also who decided that what you perceive as missing is actually lacking, right? What kind of presence can only be understood as a gap within the system? What forces continue to act even when they cannot be seen? And here I think briefly on the dark matter. I said before that which cannot be seen, something that is in our cosmos, but cannot be seen, cannot be measured. But we only know the dark matter exists because its presence is perceived through the effects it produces. I will take this opportunity to make an insertion here next week on Friday, I will participate in a conversation with the artist Sage Naija Whitson at Savi Contemporary. And she presents a performance, and afterwards we will have a conversation. And her work and her performance, her book, and most of her work is about dark matter. So this is also an invitation if you'll be around Berlin next Friday night. You can find the details about the time on Savi's page, on Instagram, etc. But about dark matter, it's the thing that exists the most in the universe. So 98% of everything that exists is the dark matters. Everything that we know, the seen and the unseen, is like 2% of the reality. And this is very humbling to try to grasp. We don't know anything about anything. So the dark matter is something impossible to see. But it's an absence of thing that is actually what holds the reality together. So it alters the movements, it curves the trajectories, it organizes the relations in everything in the cosmos. It keeps everything in tension. So perhaps some historical presences work like the dark matter. They do not appear at the center of the image. They do not appear in the name of the catalog. They do not appear as authorship, property, documentation, but they curve the field. They move the scene. They produce consequences. And I'm bringing this for us to think about this role that the artist will play within the systems, right? They will curve the systems inside. They will move everything inside, but they will not be perceived as this, but maybe we can measure the impact around. So I truly understand that the ambiguous and the ambivalent power of the absence and the invisibility perhaps is that perhaps we do not need to illuminate everything, because if we illuminate the absence and the invisibility, we will not see really anything. But we can learn to perceive the effects of what is outside the explanations, the weight, the force, the attraction, the disturbance. So this invitation is for us to think about the absence, the invisibility, not only as this place where something disappeared, but also as that which is outside the field of apprehension, but holds the reality together. At this point, I will return to the figure of the parasite, because the parasite enters, eats, learns the codes, takes what it needs, produces the imbalance, reminds the system that it is infected, in inverted commas. But I do not want to romanticize this figure, because the colonial institutions have always known how to parasite the other lands, the other bodies, the other knowledges. So it's ambiguous. It's a place that is not easily graspable, even to talk about. So when entering these systems, one can never lose sight of this. Who fed to whom? Who fed on whom? Accepting access without confusing access with justice. Becoming visible enough to enter that intestine and take what is important, but not so visible as to be completely digested. This is also a question for the artists, how to enter without being consumed, right? Not only the artists of this program, but for us as artists. How to accept visibility without becoming available. How to use the host without swearing loyalty to the host. How to feed other worlds with the resources of that system. In art, especially in the practice that live outside the traditional idea of fine arts, this question appears all the time, right? There are works that do not fit well into one object, and because of this, they do not fit well into one exhibition, and then they do not fit well into a curatorial wall text, and they do not fit well in the portfolio. Everything does not fill the boxes. They do not fit well into performance, installation, research, ritual, pedagogy, healing, politics, archive, gathering. And many times, the field tries to solve this by doing what it knows how to do, classifying, right? Calling it interdisciplinary, participatory, socially engaged, community-based, relational, decolonial, spiritual, lots of words for it all the time. Sometimes these words help, and many times they domesticate our practices. Sometimes they open paths for us, but many times they are a wrapping. They are a packaging, right? There are works that do not want to be fully explained, not for lack of rigor, but because their force depends of this unresolved part. And that's the beauty that I see in this project. There are works that, and there are artists also, who live as gap. They are not between one thing and another. They are in between. They are around the things. They cross through. They distort the frame. They make the institutions ask the wrong questions. They destabilize. They make the public realize that looking with the eyes is not enough, because there are things absent and there are things invisible. And these are the things that sustain the work. It's not possible to talk about them. But there are also things that should not be transformed into content, simply because the institution decided to perform this transparency. So I want to propose that each person do their own intimate exercise of identifying the gaps, the absences, the invisibilities that are in their practices. And instead of trying to fill this space, use it as a portal, enter inside it, inhabit even for a while. And perhaps this is what I want to propose today, that the most radical gesture is not always reveal everything. Sometimes the work is to protect the unseen and to prevent something from becoming content, from becoming data, right? And absence, it's not non-existence. Invisibility is not disappearance. The gap is not empty. And in this time of pressure for oversharing, maybe we have this little moment to think not only about how to be seen, but by whom, under what conditions, for whose benefit, and at what cost. And maybe more important than this, what needs to remain unseen so that something else can survive. And I want to finish the presentation by opening some questions for us to collectively think in the little time that we still have, because I'm not trying to close anything here. I would like to open and for us to enter these openings. So just as an open question for whoever feels comfortable to share with us, can you think of something in your life, your work, your practice that appears absent, but it is actually shaping everything that you do from the background? Someone would like to share something about this? Feel free. If not, it's okay too, but it would be nice. Okay. Yes?
There's the mic.
Oh, this one is nice. Hi, my name is Chiara.
Hi, Chiara. Thank you for the help in everything.
I was thinking of a past experience when I was also moving in museum spaces, and what was happening in this moment called and categorized as public engagement. and what was made measurable in those moments of the interaction among humans or without, with more than humans. And I was trying to go against this very present measure mentality and ways of accounting the experience that is a very powerful tool for museums to to gain legitimacy and count numbers and have nice pictures. And what was invisible there, and I haven't came to my mind workshop using educational collection, special collection, and people could touch these objects, and so there was for me first feelings that there's something that it's not made seen for some reasons, but it has a very, very fundamental and grounding effect on what was happening there. So this is an example maybe of something made invisible, but it is present. So yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you for talking, by the way. I quite often think about how my respect for other people often has to remain unseen, in the sense that I don't want to objectify or put categories onto people, and that means it gives them their own space to self-fulfill and create. I just thought to say that.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the super inspirational talk. I need to think of kind of maybe like collective moments of inspirational talks with friends, with like collectives or something in the wider field of art production, like in a sense of just having an idea together without actually then like putting it into practice, but maybe that idea just stays with each of you and develops into other things that then maybe become visible at a certain point. But it's just like, I don't know, just a whole framework of care relations in a way that are around, for me, are very much often in this I don't really see, like, in this state of invisibility in a way, and absence in the way how we consume and see and talk about art production afterwards, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a very specific example. I'm a non-native German speaker, but I've been living in Germany for 10 years, and I'm an artist, but I've always had issues writing. And recently I started journaling, and then when going through my journal entries, which were in German, I started striking out many of the words that I'd written down because they didn't seem right, and I blacked them out within the text, which turned the text into kind of a poetry, because much of it was missing. And this is something that I've started doing a lot of now, and I feel that the visibility of what has been hidden is kind of what I'm trying to express, which is this constant process of self-curation and censorship in the way that I express as a non-native speaker.
Amazing. Really cool. Thank you.
I would say one of the things that I think I also need to work on is giving space for others and othered voices. I mean, one of the things about this Vabali, or Va-Bali place, was that there were so many touristic bodies that the culture itself in that place was invisible or just a backdrop or a set. And I think that happens in so much of what is called the global south, and even in places like Spain and, yeah, Brazil, axé. So, you know, you go to these places if you're privileged enough to be able to get on the plane as opposed to be trying to cross over here on a boat with holes in it. And all you see on some beaches is bodies enjoying themselves while bodies are washing up over here. And so I would say we all need to think about that and take a step back and think about all of the bodies that were lost in the middle passages and wonder whether or not our bodies need to be so centered. I mean, on the day when historically the Dutch king apologized for slavery and its horrors, I happened to be in Amsterdam, and I was there with a friend, and it was very odd and very beautiful because everyone who had possibly been colonized or enslaved or descended was celebrating in a great explosion of joy. And I was a little weirded out when a jazz band came on stage, and they were playing great Chicago-style jazz. And then a bunch of happy co-celebrants came, and they were very beautiful and very tall and very blonde and very Dutch. And they centered themselves in such a way that all the other celebrating bodies could not see the stage. And there was suddenly a wall of like really beautiful long blonde hair being like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Sorry, F. I was like, you know, as much as I love long hair, maybe that was not the day to be so visible. So yeah, I thank you for your input. And I think we could all think about when to center our bodies and why perhaps some bodies have gotten used to taking up so much space. Because really, if I don't walk like this, usually somebody is going to walk right through me.
Yes. Obrigada. Okay, well, thank you. That's it.